Welcome to TORAH Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live out of Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Controversial Issues. Today we're going to be discussing contradictions in the Hebrew Scriptures. Thank you, Rabbi Coffman, for joining us, and thank you for... Anyway, you can actually get your hands in here. Would appreciate it, so I could actually have some extra fingers on the soundboard. Wow, that's good. How are you, sir? No, don't answer that. We already found out how you are. So when's the last time you've actually had caffeine? We all want to know this. Inquiring minds have to know.
When's the last time? Depends. I usually don't.
That's all I need to know. If you can't remember,
I don't try and drink and drive at the same time, because either it's going to give you a tremendous high or it's going to put you to sleep. So most likely put you to sleep. So here it's a little bit late. So want to make sure I'm live, ready to roll. So so drink a little bit and we'll see where it goes. If anything happens, it's not my fault.
Live is certainly better than dead. Most certainly. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Unless you're an artist. If you're an artist, apparently your items become more valuable once you die. So,
or as they say, the alternative's always worse. So, So when you wake up, so when my Rebbe would say, if I wake up and nothing hurts, I say Moda'ani in the morning, thanking God for returning my soul. So I said, yeah, but you would say it anyway, even if something did hurt. He said, yeah, but I wouldn't say it with such a fire. I wouldn't say it the same, but of course I'd have to say it, but it's just
right.
not. It's not the same.
Exactly. So, so we've got the Facebook Live thing going. I'm going to shut that off here in just a few minutes. But for all you viewers out there, if you're just now tuning in, remember, go to the YouTube channel. Bless you. Go to the YouTube channel if you really want to see what's actually going on this broadcast. So, but I'll leave this up for just a few more minutes till we get this thing kicked off, and then we'll go from there. So. All right. Well, so basically where we're at is we've got this issue that has been long going, and it's a never-ending discussion about how there's so many contradictions in the New Testament, which is part of the basis for our disbelief in its validity. Let me clarify that. Only a tiny to just to clarify that. The big issues are the actual things they teach. But to be fair, to be fair, the Christians would say, well, there's contradictions in the Hebrew Scriptures too, so that means you have to throw it out as well. And so we're kind of addressing this whole concept. And so first of all, my first question to you would be, just because there's contradictions, does that mean we should throw it out, or is it really depends on the level of it? It's kind of like the vantage point versus an absolute outright contradiction. So, where does the Hebrew Scriptures stand? Using that logic, for starters?
Well, first of all, if there is a contradiction, there's going to be an answer, right? We're not going to leave something unturned and say, oh, look, here's one verse says like this, another verse says something else, so it must be a contradiction. But there's what they call an old Talmudic dictum, and that Talmudic dictum says if there are two verses that contradict each other, guess what? There's probably going to be a third verse that's going to answer up.
That'll
right.
Clarify.
Then that's what that's what usually happens. Now you can't have contradictions where, let's say, we'll bring up some of them where it would seem that there's a direct contradiction. Either somebody said it, or he didn't say it, or someone else said it, or how many people died. In this war, some say, one place it says it was this amount, another place it says, there's a different amount. So which one is it? And you say, well, the old story. Someone, two people arguing. So the third person comes in. He says, here's the first person. He said, you're right. Then he hears the second person. He says, you're right. Then they say, then they both say, well, we both can't be right. And he said, you're both right.
You're also right.
So,
it's like
exactly,
paper or plastic.
Right.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So what you end up happening, you have happening many times, is that you have to see what's being said, and how it's being said and what's going on. There's usually, a lot of this happens in Tanakh. So people, you have one or two things happen. Either people will say they'll attribute, like these impossible verses, to interpret. They'll say, oh, this refers to this, that, and the other thing, when it doesn't, right? That's one thing. That's just bad. This is bad interpretation. Having a text without any information, etc. And then you have this case where you have seemingly a contradiction where there are many other things that are potentially or possibly going on at the same time that's not in the text. In other words, the text will say, this happened and this amount of people were killed, and another text will say, no, it wasn't that amount of people, it was less or it was more, right? But then when you look at it, like in one case, you look at it and say, wow, it wasn't the same. They weren't talking about the same war. They were talking about two different wars. So in one war, this amount of people were killed. In this war, another amount of people were killed. But it's not the same, right? So whatever.
Right.
There are different ways, potential ways of, of looking at it. But if there is a contradiction, the commentaries will deal with it straight away. It won't be something that is left up at the air and say, oh, look, there are two contradictory verses. Well, sorry, gotta go.
Right.
This is a false text. That's not the case, right? You can have contradictions in midrashim, right? Now, midrashim are not authoritative texts where we derive Jewish law from. Now, if any 14-year-old yeshiva student, you'd say, do you derive anything from a medrash? They'll say no, because it's not authoritative, even though it is similar text to what is part of the Talmud, what makes up the Talmud. Nonetheless, it didn't make it in for whatever reason. It didn't make it in. But if anyone tells you that we certain things in Jewish law we do because it says in the medrash, then they're foolish. Or in my language, they didn't pass the 614th commandment, which is don't be stupid, right? You don't learn out Jewish law from a medrash. Anyone who tells you that's a fool.
Right.
So you can't have contradictions in midrashim. That doesn't necessarily bother us. We do try and answer up, but sometimes there may be there may be just a contradiction, and that's okay because it's not really relevant. To our everyday life. When it comes to something in the Torah or in Tanakh, etc., that you have to answer up for, right? You're not going to leave. You're not going to have a case where you say, oh, these two verses contradict. There's no answer, so it must be false, right? The commentaries will jump all over it because you can't have contradictions, right? Contradictions are going to be extremely problematic. If there's a contradiction, that means that could be that there are more than one source, more than one lawgiver. That would be majorly problematic. So therefore, there has to be an answer. Now, usually within the text, sometimes within the text itself, you have to dig a little bit in order to find out what's going on. Other times the commentators will tell you and you say, wow, I never thought of that. But if you dig deep enough, in the text, it's there. It's not, it's not like they're grasping necessarily for straws, even though there are, there may be, some of the commentators will say, well, there's one explanation like this, but my dead grandmother could have given a better explanation than that, and they'll knock it, they'll knock it off and say, no, this is what it means. It could be multiple reasons, but make no mistake, it's not going to be left undone. We're not going to leave it to the point where it's just left hanging. And you can't say, well, sometimes the answer in the Torah is because God said so, right? But if you have a contradiction between verses, you can't say that, that God said so. You can have problems within verses, but again, contradiction is a much, it's a much more difficult thing and much more problematic philosophically. Because if you don't answer it up, then it could be there are different sources, there's more than one lawgiver, God forbid. You can't have two people doing the same thing, right? In other words, if if one place it says one person, another place says another person, well, who was it? Well, what's your favorite color? Corduroy. Ha ha. You know,
Let me
black or
ask you
white.
a
No, I say
question.
I say corduroy. Right?
In the general scheme of things, whenever there is a court case, right? And I'm asking this genuinely because I think what happens is if you have two witnesses that completely contradict each other, unless there's more witnesses to kind of clear it up, both of them are tossed out, right?
Right.
And so the issue that we have with the New Testament is not the same as we have with the Hebrew Scriptures, in that the New Testaments, they really don't have anything that agree. I mean, for the most part, most everything has
Right.
contradictions. So every time you get all these contradictions, so in the Hebrew Scriptures, what you're saying is, if there's two stories, well, they look for a third. Are you saying that there is pretty much a third and everything that's left if there are contradictions? Is that kind of how it works? And that does clear
If
it
there's
up,
a contradiction, there's usually something. Either there's another verse to explain it.
right?
In other words, there's a third verse that'll explain it, or within the text itself, they'll explain, let's say, different verses. When you thought it was straightforward, you'll see that it wasn't. It wasn't so straightforward. There are a number of times um, when I've been learning Tanakh. Let's say in the book of Kings, there are a number of times where there's contradiction, seemingly between the book of Kings and Chronicles. You have that between Samuel and Chronicles, well, whatever. We'll bring up a number of cases, and usually on the spot, there'll be some. One of the commentaries will say, "Well, you have to see this king wasn't really king until this point because there were other things." There are other things going on that obviously information we didn't necessarily know about,
Sure,
or it's
sure.
information further that they're going to extrapolate from that information and say, no, this is what it means. And they're going to turn the whole thing around and say, no, this is clear. And that's why it's not a contradiction.
Right.
That we have to,
I think there's a
you have
difference between
you have to see case by
contradiction.
case.
There is a difference, I think, in between a contradiction and just a different vantage point, right? And so, tell me if I'm wrong when I express it this way to people who ask, because people ask me this all the time, and I give them the same answer, and I tell them there aren't any contradictions in the prophet and actual prophecies. But there may be contradictions, the seeming contradictions throughout other parts of it. But what I always tell them is, even the Bible, that it was written, by human hands, technically speaking. So the only part that I would question if there were contradictions in prophecy, because
So now you just brought up one major Pandora's box
okay,
because
okay,
many people. I'll tell you why, because many people that come out of Christianity, or paganism or whatever you want to call it, what's their favorite topic they want to speak about? Usually it's the end of days, right? I've had many people tell me that if I would only give classes on that, they'd be with me forever. Well, doesn't exactly work like that, but the end of days is a favorite topic, and there's a lot of contradictions all throughout Tanakh. What's supposed to happen? Right? So someone will say, well, what's your opinion? And I'll say corduroy, right? That's the, we don't know. Nobody knows. It's hidden. What's supposed to be? So there are verses that seemingly contradict another. Now that's not a problem for us because it's not clear. One place it says like this, like let's say when the Messiah comes, right? There's going to be this war of Gog and Magog, and so according to one source, the temple, the third temple is going to come from heaven. Right? Another source says that whoever the Messiah is, he has to build it. The Messiah is going to come on a donkey. Some say he's going to come different ways, right? So by prophecy, in different ways, it can be unclear, right? In other words, the reason, let's say by the end of days, because no one's supposed to know what's supposed to happen. And if you try and figure it out, if you go through the verses that speak about, the war to end all wars, and you go through the prophet Malachi and other prophets about what's supposed to be, right? There seems to be they're not saying exactly the same thing. Some say they are, some say they aren't, but it's clouded in mystery. So that doesn't necessarily bother us either. Simple reason is because it's supposed to be clouded. We're not supposed to know, right? If everything added up and we had all our ducks in a row, and then what would happen if we figured out when the Messiah is supposed to come and he doesn't come and all the prophecies are in line? Then, that would make us heretics. We wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be wasting anybody's time. But obviously nobody nobody knows. So I've gotten this question many times. People say, so what's your opinion? I'm like, there are 20 opinions out there. They're like, well, which one do you think? I'm like, they're much greater people than me give their opinion, on that. If I was a betting man, I'd say like this, but, it doesn't matter. It's speculation. Nobody knows, nobody knows for sure. And that's the reason why it's clouded, in mystery. And the Rambam, among others, says that we're not supposed to try and figure out when the end of days and, et cetera, according to the verses, because what happens, you figure it out according to your own understanding, and then the time doesn't come, so then you say, oh, it's not true, it's all false, you end up becoming a heretic, etc., God forbid. So therefore we're not here to try and figure it out. We're trying to try and understand what the Torah wants from us to the best of our ability, but at the end of the day, something like that, okay, there can be different differences of opinion among the prophecies. That doesn't bother us because nobody knows. You're going to say, well, how can one prophet, say one thing and another prophet say something else? Well, God could put words in their mouth to say seemingly similar things or not. But this is some of the hardest things to understand. That's why I think it's always so funny. I mentioned this once, I mentioned it twice, 100 times, where, people throw out these like unbelievably difficult verses, and the different prophets, etc. And they see it means like this and like this. Are you sure? Like, everything's in context. You have to understand things that were said before, things that were said after. You have to see what the thing itself says. And, people turn the Torah into a pretzel and make it fit into what they think. But, in our case, you're not going to have a contradiction where it's unresolved, right? That would be exactly like, the New Testament, where you got this one saying this one saying that. Then, well, who's right? And you say exactly, right? What's your favorite color? Corduroy. Same thing. Nobody.
Right.
You can't live with those. Those contradictions. You have to have some sort of conclusion, some sort of understanding. You can't just say, well, it's just a contradiction. Nobody really knows. It was just written down. It's the whole game of telephone, and they got it wrong. So who knows? One could be written by earlier, one later. This, that. Come up with any number of explanations, but the most the greatest explanation over here is going to be, okay, what's the answer? Did he say it or he didn't say it? Right? That's going to be the question, and that's why the commentators will deal with it, and we'll get clarity on the subject. But it is pretty amazing, what if you go through Tanakh properly, again, it's very hard. There's a lot of things going on behind the scenes. As one of my rabbis told me that if I understood Kabbalah, it looked totally different. Well, okay, so I'm going through it the easy way first time.
Mm-hmm.
Second time around might be a little more difficult. But at the end of the day, we do need an answer. We do need some level of clarity for these seemingly contradictions.
Okay, right on. So it does seem to be fairly fair to say then that just because it looks like a contradiction doesn't mean that it actually is. Now, a Christian will say, well, yeah, the same thing with our book. But yet again, I don't think that they're being really fair in their diagnostics of that whole scene, because of the things that I have seen and things that others have pointed out, that you've even pointed out, is they literally are. There's no way to confuse them as vantage points. It's one thing to say there was 4 people staying at the ATM, or that there was, or that there was like 4 dogs sitting at the ATM. That's a contradiction. Now,
right,
4 people or 3 people.
But the main thing by the Christians is they don't care about contradiction. It doesn't bother them.
Right, but they'll use
even if there are.
But they will use that against like counter missionary work, saying, well, you've got contradictions too. So then all of a sudden they care, and then they'll try to justify their saying that Mary was there, Mary wasn't there, who cares? Like you said, they'll play the who cares card.
Right, but we don't say that. We don't say,
right.
well, one place says like this, one place says like that. Like, very nice. Let's go.
Right.
Let's go eat a
right.
sandwich. Like, we're going to come up with an answer. Whether you like the answer or not, it's a different.
Sure.
It's a different topic, but. It doesn't mean we just leave it open-ended, because if you leave it open-ended, that's recipe for disaster. Then it's your opinion against someone else's opinion,
right.
And then, that's definitely not Torah.
Okay, in the list that I gave you,
Yeah.
did we have Jeremiah on there at all? Jeremiah 3. Okay, if I'm just going, I think who was it, Lori or somebody on YouTube chat brought that. No, Cindy Gray, Jeremiah 3:8. It says, "I have given Israel a certificate of divorce," versus Isaiah, which
Right.
says, "God will never abrogate His covenant." She said, this must be merely an apparent contradiction, which Christians use to exploit. Now, are there contradictions between the two, or is there just need further explanation?
I'd have to look at it
Okay.
and see. It would
Well,
seem
let's
that
stick with we'll stick with the plan because I've already
okay,
given you some bullet points we're going to go
8,
through. We'll add this to
right?
maybe the next show, but just yeah, we'll keep this in mind for the
Okay,
next show.
all right.
So all right, so I'm going to turn this over to
So we should
you. I'll pull scripture up on screen.
go through the first one then. The first one that was given was who incited David to count the fighting men
Right,
of
Second
Israel.
Samuel
Right. Yeah,
or
you have
First
2
Chronicles.
Samuel 24 says God did it, and you have Chronicles 1:21, which looks like 2:1:1 over here. It's
Oh yeah,
21 verse 1. That's why I couldn't find it. It's
got right.
Mr. S, we'll call him.
Okay,
Right, Mr. S, Mr. Satan is the one seemingly um, that incited him. So now let's understand what's going on here.
okay,
Right, it's forbidden. There's a Torah prohibition to count the Jewish people. Now, when a census is being done, especially when it's done here, rabbis jump up and down saying you shouldn't have anything to do with it because they're not counting the Jewish people for the sake of any mitzvahs, for their own, I don't know, for their own knowledge, for whatever demographics, that they're doing. But you see in the book of Numbers that you're allowed, that the Jewish people are counted. Now, the tribe of Levi isn't, and they are, whatever the case is. But the reason that Jewish people are counted shows Jewish people's closeness to God. Just like, a person would count money if they actually have any, right? So that's more precious to them. They're going to know how much is in their pocket, right? So God counts each individual. Each individual is sort of their own, their own world, so to speak. So over here, seemingly you have a contradiction. Now, the Torah, if we're going to say God is the one who enticed him, right, it doesn't seem really fair, because if God enticed him, then what's he getting angry for? In other words, you're going to say, oh, the devil made me do it. God made me do it, so why is he angry?
right,
If he forced me to do it.
right,
Right? So here, the Torah doesn't specify the sin that precipitated God's anger, but the Medrash says that the people sinned not by seeking a more active role in the building of the temple, although King David himself made such an effort, was rebuffed, as it says in chapter 7. I guess Samuel 2, chapter 7. In either case, Rav David Kimchi, the Radak, one of the major commentaries of Tanakh, explains that any of these calamities, whatever calamities there may be, are the result of not just based on an individual, but the fact that there's a national sinfulness, right? The Jewish people have sinned, but God brings about punishments in other ways by means of natural common phenomena, either political discord, droughts, other things. So here, in this case, it seems that David was enticed to conduct a national census. Now, it doesn't mean, now in one case, it seems to say God enticed him. Now, God enticing him doesn't mean God put a gun to his head and told him to do it.
right,
There's no divine command, right? There's no divine command for him to do it, right? It
right,
just says that he was enticed. Means that, his evil inclination was revving up, to do this, right? But again, there's no direct command that he did it. So if you look in the parallel verse in the one in Chronicles, when it says Mr. S, right? We'll call him Mr. S. Call him Sammy, right? Sammy made him do it, right? So who does Sammy represent? Right? Sammy represents the angel of death. He also represents the evil inclination. So even if you say that Sammy caused him to do it, it just means that he had an evil inclination to do it. And if you say that King David was enticed by God, it just doesn't mean God commanded, right? Again, it just means that his evil inclination was revved up. It was more revved up than normal, right? So So it's not a contradiction where you say, is it God or is it
Right.
Sammy? It comes from the same source. It comes from the evil inclination,
Is it
right?
similar
So
to? Would it be similar to, like for example, one time I was building something outside the house, like a little fence, but it was me and David and Sarah, actually doing it all together. But the neighbor said, yeah, William built this thing outside, and it's like, well, another neighbor says William, David, and Sarah built this thing outside. Another neighbor say, well, David built the whole thing, whatever. But the thing is, again, I'm pointing out possible vantage points in the idea. And so, would it be wrong to say? Because, like, I could say, for example, if I've got employees, my customer can say, well, William did this for me and this for me, but realistically, she knows that actually it was one of my guys who actually installed this thing for her. But my guy represents me. So in this scenario, you've got the story with in the two different what looks to be contradictions. One story says that Satan came against Israel and enticed them, but in the other one says that again the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel and he moved David against them. But to me, I look at that, I'm thinking he didn't say how he moved David
But
to
that,
do
again,
that.
that's a translation, though.
Yeah, that's what I was going to
Even
ask
if you
you. Right,
there's no command. That's the
right,
problem.
right, right.
It doesn't say God made, the devil made me do it. God made me do it. He
Sure,
didn't make him
sure,
do it.
right. So, but it's not like I mean, even without the translate, let's say English was the primary. It's still, even in the English, I could look at that very easily and say, well, it doesn't say how God did it. It just says He did it. If God did it by using Satan to as the actual tool, or Sammy,
Right. Right.
then it's still, that's not a contradiction. It's just lacking information.
Right. And a lot of these so-called discrepancies are exactly that. You're missing, either it's the way you look at it, or you're missing information in order to how to understand it. So again,
Right.
someone will say, "Oh, but that's their opinion, that's their interpretation." But if you look at what they say, we'll see a few more examples. You look at what they say and how they bring it through the text, or whatever the case is, it does make sense. It does answer up. It will answer up again, because we're not going to leave it. We're not going to leave it here.
Okay, cool. All right. So what's our
All right.
next example that we can go
Next
through?
example is in the count of the fighting in Israel. 1 second.
Okay, I'll pull it up here
How
too.
many fighting men were found in Israel?
Oh,
According to
right.
Samuel 2, chapter 24 verse 9, you got 800,000. Right?
24:9. Okay.
And in Chronicles chapter 21 verse 5, Chronicles 1, you have 1,100,000. Right? That definitely sounds like a contradiction, right?
Okay.
Now, Rashi there explains that the verses are added here. What's added in one place, another place is lacking. Meaning that there are two tribes not counted in the recapitulation in Chronicles. The tribe of Levi, the tribe of Benjamin are not counted because they were despised by the king, right? By King Joab.
Okay.
So that's one thing. So you have a lot less people. Why? Because you have two tribes not counted.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a general rule we mentioned before. If you have two contradictory verses, usually the third one comes and explain it. Now, this doesn't explain why there are more people missing, necessarily from the tribe. Let's say from the tribe of Yehuda in Chronicles, one possible explanation. So he's saying that that's a general rule, but doesn't necessarily apply here, because we don't have a third verse. So how do you have a discrepancy of, so many people? So he said one explanation is you had more than 3,000 people die in a plague, some sort of epidemic. In another place, you have more, or that you have more people that were worse, were more sinners, than in the other place, and therefore you had more people die. All right, that's those are two possible explanations. Either either there was a plague that came, or you had more people deserve to die in one place than than another. But I like the first explanation better. That the fact that you have you're not counting two different tribes, right? If you don't count those two different tribes, then there can be an absolute unbelievable discrepancy, between the two. But again, that's because, as we said before, you're lacking information. Now, if you didn't know that, right? If you didn't know that, or you didn't know that, maybe there's some sort of plague, or or something else, then you're right. Then we don't have an explanation.
So,
and then you have to tell me that, then you have to tell me some other crazy explanation why you have a discrepancy of 300,000 people, whatever the case is.
So how do you deal with this? I think it's in Deuteronomy. You should not add to nor diminish from the words of this Torah.
This isn't adding. You're not adding anything.
Okay, no, but what we're saying is that Rashi declared an explanation for it, but the Torah itself doesn't. So if we say, well, we're taking Rashi's words to believe or to understand this contradiction, they would say you're adding to the words of Torah.
Because they don't know what they're talking about. Adding to Torah is like,
that's not Torah though. This is prophets. This isn't adding to Torah at all. It's actually I guess you could say, if it is adding, it's adding to another one of the books, but not the Torah itself. Right?
No, but you're not adding. The thing is, if you're adding something, it's like you're taking. There's an obligation to wear tzitzis, right? You wear 4 strings, right? Or they're 4 made into 8. You have a blue thread, if you know what it is. If we know what it is. If you add an extra string, that's called adding to the Torah. If you add an extra parchment in tefillin, that's called adding to Torah. Everything else is, or if you say, I don't have to sit in a sukkah, on sukkahs or your teepee or whatever it was, right? You don't have to sit in a sukkah. That is taking away from what the Torah says. This isn't taking away or adding. It's trying to find an explanation of why things,
right, good,
of a possible discrepancy. The other case would be that you have, let's say, the laws of Shabbos. Anything that was done in the tabernacle or the Mishkan, right, exactly done that way is a Torah prohibition. Anything similar to that Torah prohibition, even if it wasn't the exact same way it's done, is still forbidden according to the rabbis. You're going to say, ooh, they're adding to the Torah, right? That's not adding to the Torah. They're making a fence around the Torah to make sure that they're not going to come and transgress a Torah prohibition. That's not, that's not adding, or subtracting. It's really putting a fence around the Torah. And the reason that you have all this, because the Torah is extremely vague. The Torah doesn't tell you how to do things. Doesn't tell you what a sukkah looks like. Certainly, if you have to bring a nice smelling fruit, with your lulav, no one in their right mind is going to think it's a lemon on steroids, right? Now, you're like, we're going to come up with that. There are a lot of, totafot, I think we use this example also, which mean, put these totafot, on you. No one has any idea what totafot are. Rashi says it's an African language. It means double. It means 2, 4. There are 4 compartments. In tefillin, you think we would have figured that out? It's all vague, right? So that's interpretation. Yeah, we have an oral tradition, right? We spoke about that. So, oral tradition is not adding. Right? Adding is something very specific. You're adding on to the mitzvah. You're taking away from the mitzvah. This is trying to figure out what it means. So Rashi's taking information, and the commentary is usually taking information, from sources that they have, either from the text itself, which many bring in, or maybe they'll bring down from a medrash, they'll bring down, maybe from the Talmud, from other places, wherever it may be, in order to shed light. Because you're right. If you look at this discrepancy, it looks bad. It definitely looks bad because it seems like a total contradiction. But there's information, that is missing. If I were to, before, we explain what this means, someone, I'd be very surprised if someone said, "Oh, sure. We know this text so well, backwards and forwards. Of course, Levi and the other tribe wasn't counted. Yeah, that makes perfect sense." We wouldn't have figured that out. I mean, you have to sit there for hours going through it, combing through it, see what it says, what it could have said, what it might have said,
Right.
And try, there's information later that sheds light on it, but at the point where we're seeing it now, it doesn't necessarily shed light, and you see the greatness of the commentaries because, as is brought down, someone to be considered a Talmid Chacham, someone who's considered a rabbinic scholar, has to know all 24 books backwards and forwards. Now you see from these commentaries, I mean, who learns Chronicles today?
Right.
Come on, raise your hand. Who learns Chronicles? Nobody learns Chronicles. It's boring. I mean, no offense to, God forbid, coming to degrade it. It's just giving you information about who came where and what, where they were. It's just recapitulating information, etc. Which has its benefit, but a lot of times, and we'll see time and time again, there's a contradiction between what it says, let's say in Kings, or what it says in Samuel, what it says in Chronicles, right? So you have to have a breadth of knowledge, tremendous breadth of knowledge, in order to answer why it's not a contradiction, right? And most of us today certainly don't know how to learn Chumash properly, right? Meaning the 5 books of Moses or Tanakh. I mean, it's a very hard thing. It's a very hard thing to learn. Just trying to get, to simple explanation what's going on. I mean, just go to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Spend days, weeks, years trying to figure out what's going on, what's going on in creation. So one aspect is, what does the verse say? So here you don't have a problem. The verse is pretty clear, right? Both of them pretty clear. The question is, okay, there must be something else going on. See, people are very quick to say, oh, look, there's a contradiction there. Okay, let's look into it. Let's see if there's a contradiction. You close-minded bigot, you want to see why there's a contradiction or not? No, I just know there's a contradiction. Okay, nah, good.
Right.
So what are you going to argue with? They're not, they'll just say it's a contradiction. You want to hear an answer? You may not like the answer, but there's an answer, right? But usually, and I've seen this time and time again, through my walking through Tanakh a little bit, that there are contradictions that are made or seemingly made, and they're answered on the spot to show you that it's not a contradiction and why. But you see these commentaries, the breadth of knowledge that they had, which is, is absolutely incredible. I mean, you see, Rashi will quote this, will quote that, will quote the other thing. He had everything at his fingertips. It's just, it's pretty, it's pretty amazing stuff that, we don't have. But many times, just to get back to this, many times when it looks like a contradiction, usually, if there's not a third verse to come and answer up, usually it's because there is missing information. And that missing information, you, I, and everyone else, in the room here, would never have figured out that, that information wasn't there. But when you look at the text, oh yeah, that's what the text means. You wouldn't have had any idea, that was going on. And when you talk about kings and how old they were, when they started the kingship, things overlap, people die. There are all kinds of other things, that are going on that, we wouldn't have thought of in a million years. And that'll show you, should show you beyond the shadow of a doubt that it's not a contradiction, but it shows the greatness of these people that, able to figure this stuff out, because things look pretty, pretty bad, as it is.
Sure. So, okay. So, I'm thinking about doing each one of these verses, like either a handful of them in one show or all of them, all separate. But to be honest with you, I mean, just covering the idea, explaining the concept is pretty much good enough to satisfy this situation, regardless of what you read, wherever you read it, in the sense of things. And like I said, one of the most important things is my issue with the New Testament isn't just the fact that there are contradictions. That just doesn't help the situation any. Again, it's the contents of the New Testament, not the fact that they contradict each other, is a problem for me. So
but again, you have these verses all over in Ezekiel and Isaiah, like, these extremely difficult verses to understand. And people say, oh, it's a contradiction. I know what it means. It means, these short little fat kids, whatever. This is what it means. Like, people don't understand how deep, Tanakh is and what's going on. I'll just give one Let's give one example. In the story of Elijah the prophet, Eliyahu Navi in the book of Kings, where it talks about where he had this thing against the false prophets, the prophets of Baal, right? And God's, the fire comes down, eats up his sacrifice, and all these prophets die, and he kills them, and whatever. Achav, is married to Izebel, or Jezebel as she's known, and he had the opportunity, as was explained to me, to be Mashiach ben Yosef, right? To be there are two messiahs. One is the Messiah of Yosef. There's another Messiah of David. The whole question if the Messiah of Yosef dies or not. But Achav is pretty bad, right? One of the worst kings that Jewish people ever had, and seemingly, had he not been married to who he was, this is what his potential was. This is who he could have been. So the point is, why do I point that out? Well, probably A, to freak people out, but B, more importantly, is that when you see something like this, oh, he's so bad, and he's so this, and so that, when you see other information, other deeper information about what's going on, it really will blow your mind. Because what we see at face value is not even close to what it is. And, that's why I think it's hilarious in some ways, where people, quote this, quote that, and, they're looking at stuff they have no idea about the background or what's going on, and, everything else, and they're claiming things that are totally outrageous, which, we showed on, other shows. But this, like I said, a lot of this has to do with the fact that there's missing information.
Mm-hmm.
And missing information, you can say, oh, they dug it up, they did this, they did that. It doesn't matter. There's missing information. It doesn't, if a person's writing an essay, and he's got 3 points, but his main point isn't there, right? Let's say you left 2 out of 3 points. You make your conclusion, and that's it. What are you going to get? You're going to get an F. Why are you going to get an F? Because you left out the most important thing. So over here, they left out, there's information that's not there, right? It's clear it's not there. I mean, the commentaries will show you where it is, and how it ties in, but let's call a spade a spade. It's not in the text. So if it's not in the text and it's missing, that doesn't mean it's a contradiction. It means it's information that you don't have. So can you make a statement based on information that you don't have? Well, people do.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I hear it all the time. People make all kinds of crazy statements, and they say, oh, this is true and that's true and that's true. I'm like, you're wrong on this and you're wrong on that. This one, okay, you're out to lunch. But they it's because they're lacking information. Right. And people say, oh, I thought this, I thought that, and it's, and so that's what you have over here, that what seemingly would seem to be a contradiction, at the end of the day is based on not a bad interpretation, not a misinterpretation, it's lack of knowledge, it's lack of information. So if you don't have information and you haven't learned it properly, when you get the chutzpah to say it's wrong, but people do that. People do that all the time. They see stuff on the internet, newspapers, and I don't even think people read newspapers anymore. But those that do, they say, oh, how do I know it's true? Because I saw it in print.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but but I told you this 3 weeks ago, a month ago. No, but I saw it in print. I saw it in a newspaper. It must be true.
Same thing with the internet.
There's a lot of truth in stupid things, and this happened to me once. I told somebody something, and they're like, nah, it's not true. It's this, it's that. Like a month later, they saw something in the newspaper and said, see, look, I knew it was true. I'm like, I told you that a month ago. But once they saw it in the newspaper, it's like, I'm pretty wise. I saw it, it was in the New York Times. It was in the Washington Post. Of course it's true. What you know, you're an idiot. This is true.
That's funny.
So where do people, I think it's incredulous that, people go off and say, oh, I know this, I know that. I had somebody just, while we're playing funny while I'm still on my caffeine kick, that somebody once told me that mayonnaise, right? Mayonnaise can never be parv. Now, parv means it's not milk or meat. So I said, of course it can be parv. You don't put milk in it. So this person was convinced that there's no possible way that mayonnaise can be parv. It can only be made with milk. I said, I can bring you some mayonnaise. It'll say parv on it. You know why? Because it doesn't have milk in it. And this person was convinced, like, you're out to lunch. You have no idea what you're talking about.
Right.
Of course you make mayonnaise with milk. Really? Have you done your research? You want to speak to Dr. Google, Hellman's on the subject? It's parv. I've never seen mayonnaise that has milk in it. Doesn't mean it
Interesting.
can't,
Right.
but they don't make it with milk. So you're lacking information. And if you lack, but the funny thing is, if a person's lacking information and they have an unbelievable amount of chutzpah, they don't care if they're lacking information. They're going to sound authoritative and make you look like an idiot.
Right.
Right? So I said, okay, you want to make mayonnaise with milk? Go ahead. I've never found any.
That's funny. All right, cool. So, do you want to maybe discuss one more before we close this off? Let's go. Let me find. Well, I closed out the page. Give me 1 second. Yeah, we'll just kind of touch it just to kind of fill out the hour anyway. There you are, Rabbi Coffman. How come it doesn't say like crazy next to your name? Crazy Rabbi. Okay.
Because I'd blow you up if it did. You want to do number 3? How old was Ahaziah when he began to rule over Jerusalem?
Yeah, let's do that. That's 22 or 42. That's good.
Yeah, that's 20. That's 2 Kings, chapter 8, verse 26. That says 22, and it says 42 in 2 Chronicles, 22 verse 2. 22 verse 2. So in Kings. Now this is actually a very good example.
Okay.
We may have to do a review on this, but because it does get complicated. If you're missing information, this is a good way to see it in action. Because in Kings, it says it asks this. It says that his father only lived to be 40. Right. So now, if you want to say that he's 22, his father lived to be 40 when he's actually 32. So how do you get to 40? The whole question about his kingship, when he's actually king, when the kingship started, right? The whole question really, if it's in Chronicles and he said it was 42, so the Radak says that can't be, right? He had to be younger than that. So then he goes in this whole long explanation, through the different kings, and how, let's say, for example, that he says that this King Asa married the daughter of Imri, right? Who did he marry her to? To Yehoshaphat. So there was a decree on the kingship. Now we know there was a decree on the kingship of the house of David. It wasn't going to last, right? It's going to end with the house of Achav, right? The house of Achav gets destroyed. In the book of Kings, first book of Kings, talks about the house of Achav getting destroyed. And you have Ahaziah, the king of Yehuda, dies, etc. And he lost all the progeny of kingship. Right? In other words, all his kids died. They're all totally wiped out. So the Radak over here says that you have 42 years when's it counted from the day of the decree. In other words, it depends, as you mentioned before, it depends on where the perspective, where the perspective is. Right? If you go further, it says that in the 31st year, King Asa married, and then he was killed. Then he killed this other king, Tivni, became king, and then he became king, and that was the 31st year. That's when it says the 31st year until Ahaziah, and he was 42. How can you say he was 42? There were 9 years of the reign of Asa, 25 years of Yehoshaphat. That's 34. You have 8 years of Yehoram when he lived, so that's 42. Now, the Radak says, if you go through that long-winded explanation, he says that's very far from the simple explanation, right? That should be obvious. But he says, obviously other commentaries bring that in. So it's like a long, convoluted way to say it depends where the kingship is starting from, and it depends what your frame of reference is, right? Without going into all the, with all the details. So, but he says that Jehoram, who was a king, lived more than 40 years, but the amount of time he's king, when do we calculate the amount of time he was king? He was only really consolidated power for 2 years, even though he lived longer. So this is a extremely good example where when you look at what's going on, you say, well, one place it says, right, one place it says he was 22, and the other place says it was 42, right, where we see a direct contradiction. The problem is if you go through the line of kings and who he married, and the line was supposed to end where the decree starts and all that, that's a whole different ballgame, right? In other words, you have to hold all the information. Okay, who was king when? When did he start? When did he die? Does he overlap? Does he don't pass go, don't collect 200. Like, that's it, no free parking. So you get lost in all the, details, right? And so when you see the details, so here, the Radak has this whole long explanation. Okay, it sounds like one of these like big geometry problems. Okay, you take this guy, he's over here, he lasted for 2 years or 5 years or whatever, and he was only king after the fact, but he really wasn't king before, but he overlapped and this, and he married this one and that one. So there's a ton of information going through the line of kingship and who married who and when it started. Now, even though that's, obviously some of the commentaries hold this and it sounds like a little bit, as the Radak says, a little, it's definitely far, from the simple explanation, but he's giving you the wherewithal to see there's a lot more going on behind the scenes, and don't just think, oh, it's a simple contradiction. He's 22 over here and 42 over there. Well, do you understand all the, the different things with the line of kingship and the decree and all that? Of course, you missed it. Right, because you blinked, you walked outside when there was a commercial, right? No, normally you had 6 minutes, in between a commercial, but you missed it. You missed the whole thing. So since you missed the whole lineage and how it works and when and who came who, so you missed the whole thing. You say, oh, see, there's a contradiction. But obviously, there's a long, convoluted way, to say that, even though Radak says this is not, this is definitely not the, not the simple explanation. Nonetheless, we're missing a seemingly a tremendous amount of information according to the Radak in order to understand, what in the world, is going on. When does the Radak comment on this? He comments on kings because, in the book of Chronicles, it's just all a bunch of numbers, right? Who lived and when and this, all this, different. That's why it's called Chronicles, right? Just gives all that information. There's there's very little commentary over there, just giving you the numbers. That's why you have to look back, into the other books in order to see exactly, what's going on and why it's not going to be a contradiction. But the meat and the potatoes are over here in the book of Kings, in the book of Samuel, etc. That's where you're going to get the information. But again, don't make the mistake and think that, what I see is at face value. Tanakh is not that type of thing that you're gonna learn it up like a newspaper. Oh, I already learned that. I learned that when I was 7 or 8, or but there's a tremendous amount of of deepness to it that when and a person could easily go through this, the very deep things over here that person, if they're not careful, could end up being a heretic, going through it as well. So that's why a lot of people don't necessarily learn Tanakh today, because, it is extremely complicated. It is extremely, deep in many ways. And, you have to learn it like you learn anything else. You have to analyze it and see, what's going on, what's behind the scenes. That's why the prophet Isaiah, Ezekiel, I mean, you have to keep in your mind what's going on in this chapter, what went on before, what the connection is, a lot of its context. But simply these type of questions are based on the fact that you're missing information. It's not about context, over here, because, in Chronicles it has nothing to do with context, just giving you the names and, whatever. And the question is, how does this fit in? It looks like a contradiction, but we see that, in many cases that's not the case.
Okay. Well, it kind of furthers my suspicion in general by saying, pardon me, kind of what I was thinking previously regarding, if the contradictions that we find were actually in the actual prophets or in the Torah itself, I could see that could be problematic possibly. But the point that they're not, they're actually in the other writings, which again, they're subject to human error. Otherwise you wouldn't have to have them explained. They would be if it was all, and that sounds kind of weird, me saying that not all of the entire Tanakh was God breathed, because that's really a kind of a Christian card. They try to play the whole New Testament was God breathed and the whole 9 yards, but the reality of it is that it was written by man's hands, and unless it's a prophecy, an actual prophecy that God is delivering direct, and we know that's from Hashem, or if it's in the Torah itself, it needs to be infallible. I get that.
Right. That's any prophecy. Obviously, you cannot contradict
right.
what Moshe says. Right. You can't add, can't subtract. And any of these prophets, God speaks to them, and they have to give over the prophecy. If they don't give over the prophecy, right, well, they're dead meat. And
right.
so, that there's nothing to talk about. The question is, what it all means,
right,
and
right.
what it means for future generations also. So, yeah, that's definitely true.
Okay, well, cool. All right, well, I guess we can wrap this thing up then. We'll see next week, same time, same place. Rabbi, as long as you can hold this schedule, we should be good to go. And so...
Every week or every other week?
No, actually, we're going to start doing every week if you're interested.
Oh, wow.
So... Yep, that's going to be the goal.
I'm never interested. You call me up in the middle of the night and you expect me to jump and beckon at every call. And you say, Rabbi, we're doing the show. You ready? That's like what some people would say, how you doing? Good? Like you already answered your question before I had a chance to say anything. So yeah, it's such a pleasure to be here. I love getting up in the middle of the night. I love the show. I'll be here next week because I have no choice. That's it.
Yeah, I know where your Skype address is, so I got you locked in.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so people are still asking me how to get notifications whenever there's videos that we do. Just subscribe to the YouTube channel. Right next to the subscribe button is a little bell. It may not be there if you haven't subscribed, but when you click it, the bell will pop up. Click on that bell and say turn on notifications. Every time I record anything, it'll let you know the moment we start, so that way if you're on the go and your phone is tied to your YouTube channel somehow or another, it'll let you know even when you're on the run that, hey, we're recording.
Why by me is it a lightning bolt that every time I touch it I get zapped? That's because you love me, right?
Yeah, it's totally, absolutely. Yeah, so I was going to wait off on doing every week until we actually got the studio here and finished. It is on the way. It'll probably be here sometime in the next 3 to 4 weeks. And we're looking forward to get moving on that. But just for the sake of continuity, I think it's probably best that we just, across the board, is just try to keep all the shows going every week. It's a little complicated, but we'll make it happen. If you want to follow along on the progress with the building, I'll be posting videos from time to time on YouTube that you can actually follow along with. If you want to help contribute to that, to kind of help me pay for it, you can just go to the website, look for the donations tab at the bottom, and I think it's
William's wife is begging you, get him out of the house.
It's kind
get him out.
It's kind of a love-hate relationship. She likes having me here, but where I'm at geographically in the house is the problem. But it's the only place in the house I can do this. I can actually record, which just so happens to be in her little quiet place. So
it's
anyway.
All right. Most of my classes are done in a bomb shelter. Go figure, right?
That's awesome.
Anyway, my wife will say, "Hey, I can still hear you. The bomb shelter's not good enough." I'm like, "No."
That's awesome. Okay, well, cool. Well, thank you, Rabbi. It's been fun. It's always a pleasure having you on, and I look forward to seeing you next week, same time, same place, and that is 4 p.m. Texas time. What time is it at your place?
Now 1 a.m. usually
1 a.m.
midnight.
But you got to admit,
time.
This has got to be better than getting you at 4 a.m., right?
I don't know. If I have to get up at 5:30, it's almost the same. So sometimes better, sometimes worse. But the caffeine's going to kick in, so it'll be good. Don't worry about it.
You're a brave man drinking caffeine this late at night.
Brave or crazy, one or the other.
That's awesome. Okay. Shalom, Rabbi. Shalom, everybody. It's good to see you all. Thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to share the video to your other friends, especially if you've heard this claim. They need to have answers. So take care, everybody. Shalom, shalom.
Shalom, everyone.
חשוב מכל חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד, איפוק זו העוצמה